All right, excellent. Welcome to the November Working Lands Enterprise Board meeting. The first item up for business is to approve the meeting minutes from October 21st. So I'll be looking for a motion to approve those minutes.
So moved. This is Alan.
Thank you, Alan. Do we have a second?
Second, Tyler.
Tyler, thank you. Any corrections, comments? Not hearing any. No hands seen. All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed, nay. All right, motion carries. We're going to move on to our 9-10 item on the agenda and move forward to the highlights from site visits.
And I mean, we can, Kathy, if you're willing to kick us off, we can go.
Sure. Yeah,
in the
happy
order
to
that
do
they're
that.
listed. Okay, amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Of course. So I am reporting out on 3. The first that I'm going to tackle is Sunrise Orchards. They had a project to construct their cidery and to move what was, or what is, I guess, a historic carriage barn from the Middlebury area to their orchard to have it serve as a kind of epicenter and a farm stand at the orchard, which is in Cornwall. So both projects are complete. The cidery construction went from May to September of 23. The focus of the project was to be able to enable them to not only improve capacity, improve efficiency, and thereby increase their sales, but to also, as you might imagine, continue to diversify their product line assortment. So as an outcome of the project, they have done just that. They have increased their sales and their efficiencies are improving. So they're pretty excited about the outcome of the project and the opportunity to have it complete. In terms of the carriage barn project, that was from April to August of 24. They have an on-site pick your own operation at the orchard. And so having this enhanced facility let them present many more products to include their own products, of course, apples, apple cider, apple baked goods, etc., but also to be able to present more local products within that retail operation. And they also host what are events and have weekend lunches. So they've seen some really nice increases in their business as an outcome of that project. 23 to 24, they reported a 48% increase. And I do have the opportunity of working with them as a business coach for the Jobs Fund. And we know, as an example, as they were winding down this year, that they were ahead year over year an incremental 10%. So they did face some challenges in both projects, and it was really related to skilled labor, right? Having enough people to support them within the project plan at the right time. But effectively, their processing has increased really significantly. So in terms of the cidery, they've gone from 40,000 gallons and over 12,000 bushels in 22-23 to over double 23-24 to 82,000 gallons and 25-6 in terms of bushels of apples. And then in early 24-25, they were already at the start of the season producing more cider than before. So they're super happy with the project. They're really feeling some momentum despite some of the challenges that they faced this year in terms of drought and the growing season. But they're appreciative of the opportunity of the grant and the outcome of the investments made. So then prior to that, I had an opportunity to visit with Paul O'Brien in Shoreham at the Vermont Refrigerated Storage. I saw that as kind of a work in process. They weren't finished at that point, but the focus of their project was new freezer space. So effectively adding 50,000 cubic feet of 0-degree cold storage. So as you can imagine, it was very brisk in there, but the space is completed. They were in the process of kind of final, punch list activities. They too had some challenges respective to the project timeline and sourcing both the equipment as well as the construction stages, specifically getting the floor poured. But they're very optimistic about the project and again, appreciative of the grant. And then the third group that I visited, the third site, was in West Haven, and it was Otter Point Farm. They had two projects, specifically a pole barn to serve as a packing shed. And when I saw it, it was completed, and they had been and continue to use it from everything from garlic curing to what is a more efficient pick, pack, sort, weigh system for their products. I did also look at their solar panel project. That one was not complete. They had been trying to purchase used equipment to lower the overall cost because they were finding that the costs that they had forecast were higher. And so they too were facing far more significant challenges in terms of finding the skilled labor post-COVID and in their area to address the project as they had mapped it. But their overall goal for the solar panels was to reduce their propane costs for the greenhouse and thereby be able to, let's say, afford to grow more. But they are seeing an increase in their sales respective to their focus, which is in food security, as well as in wholesale. So they were pleased with some net new distribution opportunities, sales opportunities to the Vermont Food Bank and to Rutland BROC. But that one, Tanya expressed some frustration in particular, not with the grant or the opportunity of the grant, but rather the opportunity to bring the project to fruition, just the challenges that they were facing in terms of workforce and contractors. So that's all I got.
Any questions? I have a comment. I am super excited to see Sunrise Orchards pivot the way they have. I know that that's not particularly easy, and sometimes maybe we see, the next generation a little more able to grasp onto something like that. And I think Bernie Jr. has been involved for a while now, decades, and for him and he and his wife to be able to, really embrace this type of a transition, it's impressive. And I like the feel of how they've done it and being able to kind of drive behind the orchard to get to the farm market. It's just very nice and very Vermonty. So I'm excited to hear the progress that has been done. And thank you for your other hat that you wear in assisting them through it. It's great to see.
We'll pass your comments on to them, Allison. I know they'll be appreciative to hear from you. They have worked very hard, and they're both very open to taking on new things, particularly in the marketing and communication space, to really invite and engage their community in the orchard. That we formed some very fun and unique partnerships with Middlebury College and with the various businesses within the Middlebury community for customer appreciation days, and that what they saw an increase in their business, of course, but that carriage barn, project really helps them create a beautiful space from which to fully enjoy the orchard. So I know they were very appreciative of that.
That's great. I can't remember, but I think they lost one of their main marketing means when they were selling wholesale. Didn't they have a certain it was like a lower chemical use. It was a marketing deal. I can't remember what it was called. And that
Eco apples.
That's
Eco
what
apples.
it was. thank you. It's driving me nuts. I couldn't remember. So I think the loss of the eco apples kind of, forced them into thinking in an alternative way. So it's just exciting to see that, that was pretty tremendous loss, but what it's turned into is really exciting. So out of loss can come good.
Ellen, you have your hand up, and Donna, you have your hand up.
Donna was first.
Yeah, I was just curious if you happened to talk to any of the grantees about either how they found out about the grants that were available or how they managed the process of applying.
My understanding in two of the instances was that they stay very closely aligned with the Agency of Agriculture's website. And specifically one in particular connects through the newsletter, the newsletter that comes out on a weekly basis. So kudos to the ag team for kind of getting the word out that way. I didn't ask the question respective to Vermont Refrigeration. I'm sorry, so I don't know the answer to that. Maybe somebody else does.
I'll just add on the Sunrise Orchard, Kathy, tell me, stop me if you've already said this and I just missed it. Sunrise Orchard was the beneficiary of a Kendall Food System Vision Prize of $100,000, 90,000 of which is going to Sunrise for two purposes. 70,000 will be used for making really critical upgrades to the Shoreham facility, the apple storage side of their business, which they are co-owners of. And there's going to be some equipment to replace some very outdated refrigeration cooling technology that is actually, if they don't replace it, would put things at risk. So because they and two other orchards in Addison County supply almost all of the apples to Vermont schools through the Farm to School program, this apple infrastructure is mission critical because it allows them to have apples year round for schools and other institutions that purchase from them. So the good news is that 70,000 will be going into upgrading their facility, which will ensure that ability to continue to store those apples. And then 20,000 will be used by Rose Wilson to conduct a feasibility study to plan out additional infrastructure investments that are needed and to sort of map out over time what will be needed. So they're very excited. They had a kickoff meeting yesterday with all of the prize winners in New England with the foundation, and Barney was literally in his car yesterday, driving down to where he's been organizing containerfuls of supplies for the the families of the Jamaican workers that work for his orchard. There's 36 Jamaicans that come every year, and he has worked diligently to basically not overtly raise money, but getting supplies, roofing materials, toilet paper, like anything that's needed because of all of his workers' families were impacted, their houses and such. So he's also been a real leader in getting not only all the apple orchards, but specifically for his workers' families. So he was very excited at what they've been able to put together and the community response to that. So
Excellent. Thank you for that update, Ellen. Is there any other questions for Kathy? If not, we'll move on to Chris.
I think Chris actually
Chris
hasn't
on?
joined yet.
He
No.
hasn't joined? Okay.
So I
haven't
think
seen him.
we
I've seen Donna, though. Donna, you want to talk about 802 logging?
Sure. I went down and met with Seth Robillard at 802 Logging, and we had given him a $50,000 grant to purchase a Feller Buncher, and he was able to purchase a used one for $100,000 using also $50,000 in a Vita loan. And he was quite excited about this because he's been logging for, I think, about 6 or 7 years, but he's always had to hire the cutting done. And he said he was always at the mercy of, when the Feller Buncher could arrive on his jobs. And then the other problem he found was when it arrived, it would cut all the wood and leave it all piled up, and then he had to sort through it, and move it. And now that he has his own, not only can he move, at a pace that's more, he can cut some trees and then move them. But he also found that because it's a large tracked vehicle, he can go in and freeze his roads in so that, when he goes back to cut the wood, he's working on frozen snow, which is a huge help because he processes a lot of his wood in a firewood processing machine, and he wants clean wood, so it's better if it's not dragged through the mud and buried in the snow. We did talk a bit about how he found out about the grant opportunity and the process of applying. And he does feel that we need to advertise better to the forestry world. He says it's not well known, the grants that are available. I think he found out about it. He's in Craftsbury, so he mentioned that Catherine Sims had told him to apply. And then he was able to he got some help writing his grant application from someone in Danville. He didn't know who it was, but there was an organization there. And he said, it's difficult to work through, the process, but well worth it in the end. And I sent a photo of it to Claire if anyone wants to see him with his equipment, but
It's a great update. I can imagine how exciting it is that he can actually sort through it as he's cutting it too, rather than dealing with the big piles.
yes,
Elizabeth, yeah.
Yeah, kind of speaking to the outreach and loggers maybe not knowing about grant programs. Regionally, there are regional development corporations who, all do quarterly, if not more often, newsletters. But I don't know how tied in they are with forestry folks. So I'm just wondering how we can get, I've only had 2 cups of coffee, sorry, how we can get the word out and maybe connect those folks.
I think it's good. Actually, Claire has taken on the forestry committee, helped us identify actually this year the organizations and trade associations that to improve outreach and promotion specifically to the forestry industry. We have done direct outreach to like the professional. Actually, I'll let Claire, and you can share a little bit about what the response has been, but we've done significant outreach directly to forestry groups this year because of this issue. But yeah, Claire, take it away.
Yeah, we've I did some webinars I joined, I guess, kind of the regular meetings of the Vermont Forest Products Association, which they're a little bit more on like the sawmill side somewhat. And then I also met with the other professional logging contractors, one of their regular meetings. And those were their regular board meetings, but they opened it up to all members. And I think for the most part, it was mostly their board, but other members did join. And they certainly expressed during the meeting that like they all learned a lot and really like appreciated getting the overview of the program. And I was also joined by folks from UVM Extension and their like forest products business advising. So like I would talk about kind of what do you need to know about grants, and then the folks at UVM would talk about kind of what can they offer more broadly for like business support, specifically for forest products businesses. And then they gave examples of how they've worked with businesses on business planning and financials who've then gone on to receive working lands grants and how kind of that support like helped the application. Yeah, and so I know that, yeah, I think in particular connecting with the professional logging contractors, that they said that they learned a lot and we're like hoping to kind of continue spreading the word. The other thing that I did is I shared kind of that same overview. I didn't do a presentation, just emailed it, but to all of the state lands foresters, so the county foresters, and the other, yeah, foresters, knowing that I think that's an avenue that we haven't really used as much as we could, because I know that, yeah, a lot of the foresters work with loggers and can share information about the grant with them. I know that that's an avenue that, especially, I'm thinking in particular of a logger that we've had a grant with up in Essex County, heard about it through his forester. So that's another avenue. I think there's, yeah, certainly a lot of progress still to be made, but this is something, yeah, we're definitely thinking about and trying to be more intentional about. So.
And
Yeah.
so we'll see if there's any impact in the business enhancement grant round. Because this was all done like early fall in preparation for the opening of the business enhancement grant.
Yeah, and I don't know, also, like, I think as folks know, like, we've had a lot of larger grants recently with some of the mills like Goodridge Lumber and LSF, and like, I don't know if it's worth also kind of, and I know that they've been very appreciative, so we haven't kind of explored that avenue of like who are their log suppliers that they could, be sharing info about the grant with, whoever's dropping off logs at the mill and whatnot.
I think
Thank
Alex, was your hand raised for a question? Yeah, go ahead.
Not a question, but I get all the emails from all the different things, and I see the grants advertised nicely, so that path is being well done just from the different associations. I think in my dream world there'd be some sort of text message that went out also to people, because a lot of folks are just on their phones, and email's a little weird on phones sometimes, and people just don't do it. So some sort of text message campaign. And then in my dream world, there's a web grants lite that you can do on your phone, and then you can just apply, and it's awesome.
Yeah, and that's actually, we can talk about that. That's one of the sort of like recommendations, right? In the audit report, which we're going to get a presentation on, which isn't something like we have not explored a mobile app kind of version for web grants. But yeah, I love both of those ideas, Alex. Trevor?
Just wanted to thank Alex for bringing up the idea of text messages and marketing that way. We've talked about it internally. We have that newsletter, and the same platform, MailChimp, that we use for the newsletter supports SMS marketing too. So I think that's a conversation that's like pretty active in our communications team, and it's something that we're kind of pushing for. I also want to kind of like add that we have this kind of newish position of resource navigator on our staff. So Jenny Porter is in that role. Claire does a lot of this for Working Lands and does an incredible job, but the addition of Jenny to the overall division team, I think, has taken a little bit of pressure off of Claire in that role, and it's also opened up new opportunities to connect. So if people have suggestions of like other channels, folks that we should be connecting with, different ways that we can get the message out there, we have Jenny, who's really tasked with doing that kind of work and making those kind of connections. So I'll put her name in the chat, but always happy to get suggestions for how to get the word out better. And the SMS marketing is a big topic on our team right now. So thanks.
Excellent. Shall we move on to Liz for Hillside Homestead?
Yeah, let's go. So I visited Hillside Homestead. I met with Renee a couple weeks back, and they're located in Albany, Vermont, which is just down the road from me. And their project was actually a 2022 application, which was for a big sawdust shed for their tie stall barn. They bed the pack with sawdust, and they really needed a facility to hold the sawdust. And from the road, it looks like a small shed, but this shed is pretty big. And they're able to hold like bulk orders of sawdust. Before, Renee was like buying like bulk retail in the bales, and that was just like super inefficient. And a lot of it was for just the milk quality and keeping the cows clean. They were having issues with the sawdust getting wet. It's fairly wet here in Albany. And so they're able to save money by ordering more in bulk. And then being able to, their milk quality is up. They sell to Jasper Hill for milk, and it's like they get like $31 a hundredweight for that. And one of the biggest hiccups that they had was that they were quoted pre-COVID prices with a contractor, and so there was kind of a 2-year delay in finishing the project. They did finally get the tin on, I think it was in June of 2025, and then they were able to host a small group from Jasper Hill to talk about just how something as simple as clean sawdust can really improve the milk quality, and what that implications for that with our cheese in the cheese making. And so it seems like a really small project, or not small project, but like a very minor project, but it's huge for Renee because she's doing the bulk of the work on the farm. It's 65-head dairy farm. And for her, when she's mostly just doing it alone with Chet working off the farm, it's like so much better for her quality of life. We talked a little bit about like what's next in terms of goals. And I think for her, there's a couple things that they're working on, which is expanding their farm stand, maybe expanding the barnyard, and some issues that they see is access to hay and land for the hay. So while not like directly related to this project, they're like able to think about those things a little bit more. They felt like the grant process was pretty easy. But Renee, she's like, I'm on computers, I email, I know these resources, but for folks, I think in the dairy industry, she thinks it might be harder, especially for these like older farmers to like, get on the computer and find out about it. Yeah, a lot of it's word of mouth here in the kingdom. But yeah, the project's complete, and it took a while, but they're super happy with it. And I don't know, it was just, for me, I think the impact even on such a small level is like, it's big for these like smaller scale dairy producers.
Excellent. Thank you. Are there any questions? Quiet group on this one.
Alice, both Allisons. Allison Lowe shared with me after the agenda was published that Allison also did a visit, so I want to slide Allison into the list here.
Excellent. We can do that. Should we do Juniper and stick to the schedule, and then we'll add Allison in at the end of it?
Let's let Allison go first, and then I want to prioritize the board members, and then Claire and I will loop in at the end.
Excellent.
Okay, so I went to Joesbrook Farm. This is not the only grant they've ever received. I think they also received a grant back several years ago regarding growing strawberries. The scope of this work was to do some renovations to an historic barn that's on Route 5. And they have their main farm is on Joesbrook Road. They have a small English style barn that's very close to the road, and it's beautifully restored, but there's limited space. They also have a little bit of land just down behind that barn, and it's in a floodplain, which has benefits in drier years and then anything but in other years. They started leasing multiple or acquiring other land in disparate locations, primarily to diversify and to become more resilient if they were to experience disasters. And there's land associated with this barn on Route 5. It's also in a floodplain, but tremendously fertile. They also have a couple of acres in Waterford now, and they're looking at acquiring additional lands. So the scope of this work was to put in new flooring, retrofit this barn, which was designed to, it was basically designed to accommodate horse-drawn equipment for a dairy farm 100 years ago. So it did not store equipment. They didn't have water. They couldn't do, washing. They didn't have means to sewer or water. And so that's what they were going to be doing. They experienced some flood losses in 2023, and then they experienced catastrophic losses. Both fields in 2024, the one on Route 5 behind the Robinson barn, this barn, as well as on their original location, were completely submerged. They pretty much lost their entire crop except for some tomatoes that were up in greenhouses. And talking with Eric Skovstad, I got a sense of what an existential crisis this was for them, because they've been operating in a growth mode for many, many years, focusing on increasing production, which was, one of the purposes of this grant. And this, after I think it's 17 years, this loss in 2024 made them question everything, and even think about not continuing. They did continue. They rebounded amazingly well. They increased their seed start so that they could, replant quickly if a flood occurs. They worked on diversifying lands more. By diversifying their lands, this location, this barn is really important to them because it's central to their multiple sites. And they, so ironically, when their flood destroyed their crop in 2024, they actually had more time to spend retrofitting the barn. They had a really good year. And so I think they're on steadier footing. And so they were, they're also looking to increase their market reach by being able to store some of their product and working with Deep Root and with Farm Connects. He sees that as a huge advantage. I think what's important about this work is the barn, the red barn is an iconic presence along Route 5. It's, maybe not as iconic as the round barn just down the road from it, but it's a known silhouette. And this was what he described as deeply unsexy work that was required to get the barn to the point where he could actually use it for equipment and storage. So originally, the floor was multiple levels. It was, it indented, it was a lower elevation in the center and then higher elevation slabs on the sides. There was a second story, which was used for storing hay, but it was only about 6 to 7 feet clearance. So you couldn't get the equipment in anyway. So that all had to go up. They had to get rid of the concrete flooring and level it so that they could actually park equipment in there. And they worked with a local builder to do like a veneer skim coating on the concrete so that around the edges of the barn. And they also put in water lines. So I was able to see like the equipment being stored in the barn, which was a great thing. I asked him about the grant itself, and he said, it really works well. He writes his own grants. He's computer literate. He did say that he wonders where they are in terms of, tying grant applications to increased production. So they've been in growth mode now for, more than 15 years. They went through this horrific flood and actually, back-to-back floods. And they went through a mode for, for 15 years where they put everything they invested was in the farm. Now they're starting to back off a bit, and they're wondering what is going to happen in the long run now that their kids are getting older. Are they going to take over the farm? So they're thinking about the bigger picture. And the other thing is that they're focusing on resilience. Rather than saying, oh yes, if we invest in this, it will increase our production. I think they're still not trusting the ground that they walk on in terms of, another 2024 could happen. So, but overall, the barn looks great. It's functional. Next they're going to be replacing the roof. I also, suggested that they get in touch with PTV or, start looking at other historic preservation grants. But those grant funds would not have made the kind of work that they had to do for this. So that's it in a nutshell.
Sounds great. Thank you for taking the tour. Was there any pictures sent in?
I did. I took them on my cell phone and I can send them to you.
Perfect.
I'm
Cool.
not a great
Yeah,
photographer.
you can send them to me, Allison.
That's
Okay.
all right. I think it's great.
Yeah, and we also normally the grantees are also in their final report requested to send in photos, so we can circulate a photo post meeting of
Nice.
the barn. Hopefully we have a
Yeah.
good one. I can't remember.
Yeah.
I can actually share one right now.
Yeah, so looking at the final report, he had
Wow.
still that's from the back, that's facing the field. The other side is where they put in the doors to put in the
Mhm.
equipment. In his closeout report, he had indicated some hesitation about, whether, how they were going to fare in 2025, and 2025 has turned out to be a really good year. The other thing is that there's equipment, plumbing equipment that's now delivered and in the barn, and I took pictures of that. So they're going to keep fitting it out.
That's great. That's
I
wonderful. Any questions?
Yeah, any questions?
All right. Thank you, Allison. You're off the hook. Elizabeth, you want to move on?
Yeah, I think I can do Juniper Chase in 2 minutes.
Sure.
Actually. So Juniper Chase received a $75,000 supply chain award, and it is a nursery, a native nursery, and they're, the interesting part of it's really sort of a values driven investment on their part. Like they want to produce the best tree stock and like the specific varieties that they want and have that level of control for their forestry business. So most of the seedlings being produced, they're using themselves on the land that they're managing for. I think they're working with like over 100 landowners. They're the foresters that are managing the land for a large number of landowners all over Vermont. And they've been, very successful in meeting their goals around the number of seedlings they wanted to produce in the nursery. They had 20,000 stems that were successfully planted and harvested in 2024. And that exceeded their goal of 15,000. And they are selling some stems. They're using most of the seedlings. They do sell about 7,500. They sold 7,500 seedlings in 2024, mostly to conservation organizations in Vermont, New Hampshire, and like some in New York. And they are interested in expanding. They have the land to expand. It's actually amazing. It's like the actual footprint of producing that number of seedlings is not like excessive. I think I was picturing a much bigger nursery when I like thinking of that number of trees. But they really are quite, yeah, it's just dense. The trees are dense. Deer pressure is a major issue for them, they're finding out. So they are going to have to invest in a fence at some point, which is going to be somewhat significant investment. But I think the biggest thing that they communicated was there was two things. One, the time savings that trying to see if I noted the name of the machine that they invested in, but it's a planting machine. And so what they were able to do in 3 days' time, they can now do in half a day around planting. So it's like a huge savings of time. And the other thing that really stuck into my mind was how much staff have enjoyed working in the nursery in the spring. The foresters, and they sort of rotate through. There is like a manager, a primary manager of the nursery, but I thought it was interesting they mentioned that it's been like the work has also just added to workers like quality of like quality of work life, I guess. I think there's another word for that. Yeah, so I'm a little bit over time, but I'm happy if there's questions to answer any. And the other thing that the grant supported was an irrigation system for the nursery, which has been very helpful, clearly.
Especially this year, our drought. Good timing. Any questions? Thank you, Elizabeth. I'm going to assume that probably FPR doesn't have an update because I don't see them here.
Well, Catherine's on. I'm not sure.
Is she on?
Oliver.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't see Catherine on. Okay. Excellent. So Catherine, would you like to give an FPR update?
Apologies, I did not get a chance to talk with Oliver.
That's okay. No problem. Don't want to put you on the spot if not needed. Elizabeth Nance, ACCD.
I'm going to be equally as brief. Excuse me. I would like to get with Tate and or Lindsay, talk about some legislative priorities. And I don't know in the past, my predecessors, but I think I'd also like to get with FP&R. We do a lot of collaboration on outdoor rec, but not necessarily in the working lands agriculture. So I'd sort of like to do that.
Okay, excellent. Well, I'll give a quick update, and then if we still have time, maybe we can switch over to Claire to discuss some of the site visits that she did. So first off, that I would like to talk about is the Supplemental Disaster Relief Program. We're excited that the federal government is opened back up because we were tentatively awarded $31 million through the SDRP program, which intends to provide help for those affected by the 23-24 floods. So we will continue once we get that contract signed. We will be putting out as to exactly what that's going to cover, so folks can apply. My understanding that timber is included in that, so we will be working with FPR. Last month, we discussed that our budgets have been submitted to the governor's office. I think we were all aware of the coalition, the Agency of Ag, ACCD, and FPR all put in the same recommends for working lands. So that's pretty exciting that we're all singing the same tune there. And then mid-December, we are going to be meeting with our chairs, Durfee and Engels, to discuss our policy proposals, which usually are split up between two committee bills. One starts in each chamber. This year, we're inviting some other folks that are not just from the agency. So Vita, their CEO, Joan Goldstein, will be participating. There's the appetite to have VAC, Vermont Ag Credit Corp, dissolved into VITA, Vermont Economic Development Authority, which will take statute change. So Joan will be joining us for that part. And then you may have heard there was some in the continuing resolution that was signed last week. Hemp has now, I would say, the Farm Bill was renewed, but hemp is no longer in the sphere that hemp was in, especially when it comes down to the THC levels because of some language that was put in the continuing resolution last week. So you may have heard it referred to as a loophole. The loophole has now been closed, and that does affect our producers here in Vermont, and will affect them on their ability to legally participate in interstate commerce. So we've been working with the Cannabis Control Board on these issues even prior to that language passing last week. We hope to fix it on the Vermont level, and then we just started engaging in conversations yesterday to see how we can work on this and get a fix on the federal level as well. So more to come on that. Also, accessory on-farm business. Many are aware that there was a Supreme Court decision at the end of the legislative session last year that basically, in simple terms, states that towns can regulate farming, and it was always understood that towns would not regulate farming that was subject to the required ag practices. So we've been working with the League of Cities and Towns on some proposed language, as well as other partners in that. So NOFA, Rural Vermont, VDPA. So we will continue to work on that this legislative session. So been busy there. We had the first Dairy Expo, which I was not able to attend, but sounds like it was very well received. And I understand that the Dairy Expo will be coming back next year. So that's fun. I know many have missed the farm show. So it seemed similar in sight from what was up there, and I've heard nothing but positive, so pretty excited about that. A lot of grant opportunities available on our website. I would encourage folks to visit and see what the timeline is. It's a busy time of year. So that's all I have. Let's see, we want to take a break at 10. I'm going to turn it over to Claire, and Claire can pick how she wants to move through her 3 visits.
Yeah, thanks, Allison. I think I'll just share about Finale Ferments. So they're a ferment business in Brattleboro. They're based out of the Retreat Farm. They had been based in a different space, I think in Bellows Falls. And this grant came at a really important time when they had identified this new space that they were moving into and needed bigger and newer equipment as they transitioned into the new space and increased production. They buy from all kinds of local farms across Vermont. I think they do source some from Massachusetts and New Hampshire, but it's primarily Vermont farms. And let me pull up, we wrote on our blog a piece. Actually, Gulet, our intern from the summer, wrote it since we both visited in July. But the new space is huge, and the equipment that they've purchased has really enabled them to increase production. I'm not remembering the exact numbers, but it's also really improved like the quality of life. They have this like big like mixer or chopper piece. And they have kind of like lifting equipment, so there's not nearly as much like bending and lifting that needs to happen, which is great. They also vend at the Big E, and so they were really excited to be able to increase production in, I guess, yeah, their grant was from 2024, so for last year at the Big E, and then for this year. And they also can do some, like they have this like retail window where they also sell like hot dogs and other things on weekends out of the retreat farm space. It's like right up against a farm store there, which is really cool. Yeah, and I just really enjoyed meeting Allie, the owner. She's like super, she's very artistic, and they have this like big mural on the wall that one of her employees has done. Like she has an employee that goes and like does murals all over the country. Like it just seemed like a very like fun team and place to work. And she's not like, I think as she put it, I asked her like about her business experience, and she just feels like she's someone that's kind of hustled for her whole life and has kind of like made this work and taken advantage of resources. And she used to work on farms. And so, yeah, I think she talked about how she really cares a lot about her team and wanting to retain employees, and that the grant has been really helpful for just kind of, yeah, making it an even better place to work. Yeah, so just in terms of the numbers, in 2023, which was before the grant, they had purchased 20,000 pounds of produce. And then in 2024, which was after the grant, they were purchasing 50,000 pounds of produce. So mostly cabbage, cucumbers, and root vegetables. They also do some like really interesting sourcing of things like nettle and turmeric, mushrooms, and ginger, like grown in Vermont. And they'll work with chefs and like create new products based on kind of what's available and what they're excited about. Yeah, so I think that's the main piece that I'll share, and I'll put in the chat the short piece that Guled wrote, which has some photos, some great photos of their team in there.
Thank you for that. Seems like a super fun group to work with. With what I see on their social media, it's just such a positive vibe that's sent out.
Yeah, yeah, and we did talk a little bit about the kind of the grant process. I think she found it very like easy and approachable. So that was, you know, good to hear. Yeah.
Any questions for Claire? If not, I suggest we take our, what are we at, 10-minute? Is that what we're gonna do, a 10-minute break? Feel free to shut off your videos. We'll shut off the recording and we'll come back at 10 after 10. And then we will be with Incommon. Excellent. Thank you all.
Curtis and Aisha, we're just taking a break right now, but everyone will be back at 10:10.
Okay, sounds good.
I was getting the breakout rooms ready. We just want one for each of you, basically, or do we want? Okay.
Yeah, I think that worked well before.
Okay, great. And I think one of them will be, again, like before, just because I think the way some people are joining the meeting, they don't have access to the room. So I think one of the rooms will be like the meeting and everyone else will leave.
Perfect. Thanks, Claire.
That's good.
Yeah.
Claire, you remind me with the recording, I see it's still going. If we go into
Oh,
breakout
yeah.
sessions, does that shut
Yep.
off? Okay.
I think I need to shut it off myself.
Okay.
So yeah, if you can
I
help.
couldn't remember
remind me.
because I know we won't have a quorum. And if your main group stays in the big room, your recording will still be going
Right, yeah, so we need to shut it
without
off.
the quorum. So just
Yeah.
a little reminder on that.
Yeah, no, thank you.
No problem. We'll wait for a few more screens to turn on. Hey, Erica. Good to see you.
Good to see you too, Allison.
Is Elizabeth back on?
I am.
There you are. Excellent. So are we going to go in breakout rooms for the 10:10 to 11 portion? Is that what I understand?
No, just for part of it.
Just for part of it? Okay.
Or sorry, that's later on for the implicit
Yeah,
bias.
so the-
I just wanted to be super prepared. I think we'll just pass it
Okay.
to Erica and Aisha and Curtis for
Excellent.
this part.
All right, take it away.
All right, sounds great. Good morning, everyone. Excited to be with you today, and we're gonna
Erica,
start
your
off-
volume is low.
Gosh, I had this problem yesterday, and I'm not quite sure why.
You're audible, but it is low. People might.
I'm gonna get really close to my computer and hopefully speak really loudly so people can hear.
That's better. Like that volume is not loud on our end.
Okay.
It might sound loud to you in your in your head, but that's good.
Okay. So we're going to start out this morning by just walking through a summary of the audit report that we developed that I believe Elizabeth had sent out to you all. And we'll have a chance to discuss and talk about it. And then we're going to have a more interactive session that Curtis will lead on implicit bias. So the next like 45 minutes or so will be focused on the audit, and then the last hour will be in a more interactive session with some breakouts, or at least one breakout for that portion. So I'm going to start sharing my screen and get it into slideshow mode. See, can everyone see that?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, terrific. Excellent. So yes, this morning we'll be talking about the audit report that I believe you have all received. So just a little bit of background about this process. You all know we are working with you for the next several months until next summer on this overall process around equity and grant making and making the fund more accessible. So our first steps were really to conduct an audit, and what that entailed was several meetings with the grant management team at the agency. We conducted a comprehensive materials review, and we designed and distributed an audit questionnaire. It was quite a lengthy questionnaire. If you recall, for those of you who have attended the summer symposium a late summer symposium in late August, we shared a large list of questions that we had developed, and we sort of looked through the materials and then also this audit questionnaire with agency staff to really start to dive into these questions. And of course, we'll be doing other activities that will help us answer other questions like the surveys, interviews, and a focus group. So I'm going to pass it over to Aisha to share sort of a little bit more about the audit, and then we'll get into some of our short-term recommendations.
Thanks, Erica. Yes, so going through the audit, as Erica mentioned, there's quite a lengthy set of questions for it that were included in the report, but just wanted to give the overview of what was reviewed. There was almost 30 documents or materials that Elizabeth and Claire gathered together for us to look at based on our kickoff conversations and what we had expressed that we would be interested in seeing. And so these ranged from governance documents all the way through watching the applicant webinar and reviewing that. And then for the actual questions, we really aim to address these gaps in terms of what hadn't been answered otherwise via the materials review or the meetings that we'd had thus far, or just hadn't been answered fully by those two. So these also ranged quite widely, from clarifying if or what forms of alternative documentation might be accepted in applications to whether the decision-making process is or at least feels transparent and well documented internally. And the full list of both are in the full report. Next slide.
Whoops.
So what stood out immediately from the document review and even the initial meetings, and honestly the process of coming into this project, was that there is no definition of equity either in statute or even used by WLEB and by the grant management team. This was further confirmed via the audit. And this is sort of a cornerstone of what we'll be looking at throughout it. It affects all of the other recommendations as they come up, because without a definition or at least shared language around what equity means to WLEB and for the fund, it can feel really difficult to take action on improving equity because there's no similar established baseline or foundation to work from, even if there is alignment around achieving a higher level goal around equity and improving it. So there's no clear standard. And one other aspect that's kind of a direct recommendation that we ended up giving relating to it was that there were clear expectations by the board, for example, regarding what business viability meant, but the RFA language didn't state this, so it wasn't clear to the applicant. So that became sort of an equity issue in terms of, who is this fund designed for and who is it supposed to be reaching? And there wasn't anything to ground that in. Also, we identified that some elements of the board composition could be actively contributing to inequity. Obviously, the board composition itself, the seats are determined in statute, and those seats are largely designated based on areas of technical expertise, which makes a lot of sense. But there could be consideration given, again, maybe depending on a definition, there could be consideration given to making sure that also reflected on the board is expertise in reaching and serving underserved communities, if that's something that is deemed an important area of knowledge and expertise to bring into the conversation as well. And that could be via seats, or it could be something that the board really wants to consider when new members are being brought in. Another aspect that felt like it could be exclusionary for some people is just some of the expectations, such as that they would be able to bring in financial support, thinking through if this was someone who is coming from an underserved community themselves, if that would be feasible or if it would be perceived as a barrier, as well as some of the ground rules that might inadvertently create some unwelcoming environments. The technological barriers are fairly straightforward, the technical accessibility of the fund. And so I'll go through these a little bit, but some of these have already started being addressed. Eric and I reviewed both of the RFAs before they went out for this current grant cycle, the service and TA provider, as well as the business enhancement grant language that Eric will be able to share more about in a few moments. As you can see here, it's things like not being able to do the application without internet access or a laptop. The RFA and web grants both not being available in a language other than English. Very kind of basic and straightforward pieces. But the last 2 points I do want to draw a little more attention to, the high readability level and the length of the application itself. These are quite significant barriers. And like I said, we started to address them to some extent, but the the readability level of it is something that came up for us because it very much is difficult even for someone who speaks English as their first language. And the next slide, we'll get into this a little bit in terms of applicant barriers, but we have a community survey out right now, and that's something that has been clear from even initial glancing at the data there that the length and the amount of technical knowledge and skill to navigate the application has been mentioned by quite a few that have responded to that survey. Next slide. Okay. So applicant engagement, as I just mentioned, barriers around the applicant outreach and engagement aren't possible to glean entirely from this internal audit, hence why we're running the community survey. But there were a few flags that jumped out for us quite readily, the lack of targeted outreach being the first one towards formal outreach done to reach historically underserved groups. Lack of targeted outreach is really important, especially for such a complicated application. It's something that we've worked on with other states, that there really needs to be the sense that that if you want to reach those types of groups that are not currently applying for a fund, then they need to really feel invited in. And that often requires, extending further in some way to reach them, because there is going to be a sense that this is not designed for them currently. And so you need to, if that is what you want to do, figure out ways to break that down. That can be through direct outreach, that can be through working with partners who have deeper connection to them and finding ways in that way. We'll be able to give more recommendations on that post-survey. And the other two that are here is just engagement primarily via email. Could be a pertinent barrier for some, depending, particularly among rural communities and older applicants. So just flagging that it is worth being aware of. And then something that we'll probably be discussing more in the coming session with the reviews coming up is that a lack of transparent reasoning for why an applicant was rejected can be very off-putting. In the sense that it might make them feel like, well, I don't know why I didn't get it, and so it's not worth me putting the time in again. And so figuring out ways for there to be more transparent, equitable dissemination of information, such as providing their scored rubric, could be a useful way to mitigate that, as well as having a little more clarity around the holistic reasoning that does end up making the final determinations. And finally, very pertinent to the second session of this call today, the audit findings around reviewer guidance really brought to the forefront that there's just a lack of training. So that's what we'll be starting today, but lack of training for helping mitigate implicit bias or just promoting more equitable evaluation practices. And then also just how to consistently score, especially around the equity piece. I know that that's something that's actually stated in the reviewer guidance, is some notes on that section of how to make sure that you're not doing your own research into a group, or the assumption should be made that they have already met that that they've already met that standard. So just being able to have some further clarification on what that looks like and how to score that. And again, that goes back to the initial point, to having a definition of what equity means, or shared language in the interim would be useful for having a big foundation to work from. And then, of course, also just that the grant review panel is not ethnically or racially diverse, or I'm not sure on the makeup in terms of income levels or education levels or things like that as well, but ensuring that there is diversity within the reviewer panel is also a useful tool. I'm just reading Elizabeth's comment now.
Great, thank you, Aisha. So Aisha already touched on some sort of initial recommendations that, we've been discussing with agency staff, but I wanted to just go through a few of our recommendations here. So some of this might be a little bit duplicative with what Aisha just said, but so a first one is provide clear information on how to access information. Just in general, I think the agency does a very good job of putting a lot of options out there. But I think there's always more ways that can be explored in terms of being accessible. One example is, a Q&A session maybe outside of standard working hours. So that would be, one option to expand some accessibility there. The language, having potentially applications in additional language, and simplifying word choices and shorter sentences, as well as just having the language be in a lower reading level.
Erica is breaking up for everyone a little.
I think she might have frozen.
She's
Completely, yeah.
frozen. Yeah, she's frozen.
Reading level on it. And
Erica?
yes.
You broke up for us for a good minute, maybe.
Oh no, goodness, so sorry about that. Okay. If I break up again, Aisha, text me and we'll just pass it back over to you. Were you able to still see the screen?
Yes.
Okay. If I turn my camera off, will you still be able to see the screen that I'm sharing?
Yeah.
Let's try it. Yeah. Okay, I'll do that. It's actually not letting me turn my camera off, probably because I'm screen sharing. Okay, if I break up again, holler, and I'll pass it over to Aisha to finish this up. And then listing eligibility criteria on the application. So this was interesting. I mean, this is something that's been coming up in the work we're doing with Maine.
Well, I guess that answers whether or not she's still on call. Okay, let me go ahead and share my screen, and Erica will rejoin us when she is available. And so now I have to clarify if it looks the same.
It does, yeah.
Yes.
It looks same slide and it looks the same.
Perfect.
I'll let you take it away, Aisha. I'm back, but I'll let you take it away, and I'll pop in if I need to.
Perfect. So Erica was going through listing the eligibility criteria early on, as well as clear purpose for equity scoring components. This ties in the second one, types of grant, businesses the grant is designed for, e.g. those with strong financials. That ties into what I had mentioned on a few slides back of making sure that there is clear understanding for the applicants of what this fund is supposed to be designed for and who is supposed to be inviting to be awarded. And so that language has actually been updated. I know Claire and Elizabeth worked together to add a little paragraph in that now does make that a little more apparent. I know it was somewhat communicated previously through just the ask of having such clear documentation on the financials, and we just felt like it was an important thing to have up front so that folks did not spend time that was not going to be useful for them on starting to fill out the application. And then we just went through and we cut a few of the superfluous questions based on going back and forth with Claire and Elizabeth, such as, defining the business stage, because unfortunately the definitions that were offered were quite lengthy, and we heard from the team that they often did not get applied quite correctly, or the self-selection wasn't necessarily accurate. So we just tried to cut out anything that did not seem like it was imperative to the purpose of the review and could become somewhat of a detriment in terms of the process. So those were the initial recommendations based on our RFA review. And then what we also included in the report, just because it is coming up, and by January we will be able to present the full short-term recommendations report, we decided to start sharing with you some of our anticipated short-term recommendations, just so that you could kind of see where we're at, and this will be what the latter half of this is about, is sort of a discussion around any other questions you may already have, but really these anticipated short-term recommendations. And and again, Erica, jump in at any point if you want to add to it, but the first one that really came up again was the targeted outreach to historically marginalized groups. We know that there is some efforts sort of underway. There's, a couple of groups that do have deeper connections to some identified historically marginalized groups, in groups like TA providers to them, et cetera, that are in connection with the fund and with the grant management team. But really thinking through what a more formal process could look like. And this becomes, a bit of a layered approach, because defining who you want to reach might require having that shared language or definition to work from, and then being able to identify what sort of measures would be useful for that. And so having a really thought through process for who you'd want to reach and how you might want to reach them in order to achieve those goals. Clearly offering ESL support either directly or through a partner TA provider. We do know that there is already, at least there has been in the past, some groups or some applicants that have been able to get TA support for Spanish language or et cetera, versions of the application through a TA provider, but just making there a more clear formal process developed, whether that's through a specific funding set aside or whoever that TA provider is, just having it be very upfront that if you have this need, then this is the TA provider that would be able to help you to this extent, et cetera. So just making sure that it's very clearly laid out, whatever ends up being possible from there. Further simplifying the RFA applications. As we just went through, the initial recommendations were provided and some changes have already been made. But there's definitely more ways that the process could be simplified and streamlined. So, one thing that we have sort of discussed already with the grant management team and requires a lot more thought behind it is, would it make sense to have sort of a shortened application for micro grants or the smaller end of the spectrum of grants that are provided, and then existing more robust one for anything over a certain financial marker. Looking for, again, just further questions that could be simplified in terms of language, or maybe don't need to be included or don't need to be, if there's any redundancies within them. Yeah, like I said, there's just definitely already a trend within the responses of the community survey that the application is quite difficult to navigate. So once we have all of that feedback in from the survey, we'll be applying that and looking for further options to simplify and streamline. And then for the board composition piece, as kind of discussed a little bit earlier, reasonable that the current designations are based on expertise, but looking at maybe extending those into issues that do relate to equity or just specific familiarity working with certain underserved communities. And again, making sure that we keep in mind that, underserved could range from certain, racial groups to, immigration status to education status or rural communities. And so just thinking through what that means and how that could better be represented among the board if it's not currently being, and that might also end up being something that has a bit of a long-term recommendation too if it requires statutory changes. The other aspect of the board piece is considering, board and reviewer compensation based on need. We know that right now there is the per diem for the board at a certain rate, but also there is a significant expectation of time and energy for this board. You're a very active and engaged group of people. So just thinking through if there's anything that could be done there. And this is definitely an area that we would need to dig into a lot more in terms of understanding it. So this is very much a currently just anticipated recommendation that might shift based on what we learn over the coming month or so. Implementing an anti-bias or implicit bias training will be kicked off shortly with Curtis. But yeah, developing also more of an evergreen implicit bias and anti-bias practice for all reviewers. So we're beginning this work with the WLEB members and looking at creating something like an online training module for all reviewers next year to be able to implement for the 2026 review process. And one other anticipated recommendation that is going to require a lot of conversation and thought, because there's already been discussion within just our small group of the feasibility of it, is blinding applications during the review process. So that typically, most common versions of blinding is just removing the name of the business and the individual and any key demographic identifying factors. But what we've quickly recognizes that Vermont is a very close-knit state when it comes to the ag community. And so those factors alone might not actually blind an application. And if that is the case, what does it mean for some people to have a sense of who they're reviewing and others not to? And does that actually create more bias in some ways? And so really thinking through what that would look like tailored for this situation is going to be on our plate for the coming weeks. And so now going to go ahead to the next slide, which is really just opening up the rest of the time for discussion and reflections. Happy to go back to any slides to get the text back up on the screen at any point. But we just wanted to really have a general conversation. We know that not everyone may have had the chance to read the full audit report yet either. So this is really a high-level summary, and there's much more in the document. But yeah, if there's anything that you had already had a question about, if you'd read it, but if not, if there's anything that stands out, is surprising, we open the floor to you all now. And can also bring in the other questions too, if there's something you feel is already being addressed, anything you would disagree with or want clarification on. Jump in with any questions or comments.
I don't see any hands up yet, but I will ask what's on my mind. As far as the implicit bias training goes, are there some that exist already, or is that something we would work to make specific for the WLEB program itself?
I would pass that to Curtis.
I mean, that it's a question we have for you all, and we'll get into this when we get into our session. We know that there are existing implicit and unconscious bias trainings that do exist in some agencies or in government. I'm not sure the extent to which that does exist in Vermont at this point. It certainly exists in other places. The training that we'll get into shortly is something that my colleagues and I have developed over the last dozen years. It's done more and more out there, and there's good research that you can dip into. And so we'll give you a taste of some of that shortly. But we also defer to you all if there are things already in place in the state that you might pull from. Whether it's in public organizations, private organizations, and the like.
Mhm. I think the reason that I ask is I think about prior to my work in government, and maybe it probably was my first work in lands meeting, and hearing all the acronyms of RFAs and RFPs and not really understanding that, and how it's overwhelming, I would say, for somebody who hasn't worked in government to step into the board situations like this. And I think, as far as training goes and being a reviewer and those sorts of things, it's also a component to it would be the educational piece, and probably the things that we take for granted of knowing those acronyms and what they mean and the process and how it works. And so I'm just trying to figure out like how you get the most benefit from it and when you would do it as far as onboarding. Do you wait until you actually start going through, the grant making process? Do you do it right before the reviewing piece? I mean, it's overwhelming as to what we expect from board members, I think.
I mean, it's a great point and a great question, and it seems like the more that could be done upfront so that people don't feel overwhelmed in the process, the better. And to go back to what Aisha and Erica were sharing about, the review process, when there is language that doesn't feel like it's accessible, when we use so-called alphabet soup of all these acronyms, and sometimes people will just assume, well, I should know this, and they don't want to ask questions about it. And then if they're reviewing with ignorance, that's not support to anybody. So you certainly want to be able to set everybody up for success, and also realize that there may be some who are more intimidated by the process because they don't have prior experience. So we're going to talk about this when we talk about implicit bias, really putting ourselves in the shoes of somebody else and how they might experience a process would be really important. But also remembering our own, right, experiences when we were new to something, or when we felt like we were something of an outsider and trying to get on the inside. It can be it can be a daunting experience. So bringing that empathy is pretty important.
Thank you. You said it better than I.
Oh, it's a great question.
Are there any other questions or comments?
This is just sort of a technical thought I had while you were talking, and having a dyslexic kid who's accessing the written word in lots of different ways now. There's also a lot of technology with the read aloud and having words being able to be read to folks from an application. So just curious as we consider that about some of that technology that could be a helpful, accessible tool.
Yeah, that's a great recommendation. Definitely as we go through, again, post-community survey, digging into what the major barriers are, could be an excellent workaround to navigate accessibility for some.
Don't see any other questions. Maybe they'll come as we keep moving.
Ellen put a question in the chat or a comment. Ellen, are you seeing just at the top the translate button, or are you seeing specific resources that are in other languages?
I was just along the side. I didn't explore it, but it was something that I just literally just bumped into yesterday, and just sort of it triggered for me. Is that stuff that is available in-house in Vermont to do that, in state government to do that, those translations?
I think there are statewide
in this case, it's on the
contracts
website, but I was thinking just in terms of what Aisha was saying, of that things are only available in English. So just wondering about the resources that might be available if we wanted to go that route of having everything translated.
Yeah, I believe there are statewide contracts that the Office of Racial Equity has, but we would still have to, the working land budget would have to pay for those. But it's definitely something we can look into with, I think, both the Chief Marketing Office and the Office of Racial Equity. And all state websites now, though not web grants, because that's an external thing, have a Google Translate feature at the top that can translate the text of the website. I mean, it is Google Translate, but that is available at the top of every state website.
And I think, though, there's going to be we have to do an assessment process by talking to English as a second language folks, whether the TA, whether translation is what's helpful, or whether it is the TA support. Because I think we could invest quite significantly down one path and find out that it's actually not that helpful. I know that the New Farms for New Americans has been learning a lot about what types of supports and teaching are actually helpful to the farmers that participate in that program. And I think written communications have not been very widely in any language helpful, where videos, for example, have been more helpful, like somebody speaking in the language, something that and also things specifically that can be watched on the phone. But yeah, I think there's quite a bit of exploration to do around that recommendation before it becomes a recommendation.
Yeah, and the other thing that I would add in terms of the recommendations is, as mentioned, we're going to provide the actual report come January when we've finished all of the assessment. And some of them might be in that discussion process recognized as needing to be rolled over almost into some aspect of a long-term strategy. If there's more time needed, if there needs to be more analysis, exploration, et cetera, done. I mean, one thing with translated applications is that there's also the back end of that, right? Is the person expected to submit an application in English? That seems unreasonable. And so if they're able to submit it in the language that is relevant to them, what does the reviewer see? What does the grant management team have to do to process that? Is that being translated on the back end? Are we using Google Translate? So there are a lot of additional questions that will be coming up for each of these. And so the short-term recommendations that we do provide in January should definitely be understood as starting points for conversation, and there will be strategies that need to be developed to implement them.
I think to that point though, Aisha, I think it would be helpful to like add in some of that language, like add in the further exploration needed around
Yeah, and the short-term
recommendations.
recommendation report will be much more robust and in, as we mentioned, flushing out sort of what these initial anticipated recommendations are reflecting currently.
And and we've heard and David just put in around acronyms, that seems to be a big one, so we can really look through it. Again, kind of looking at where we can simplify the acronyms and make it really clear up front what they are. Terrific. Any other thoughts, ideas, anything you felt like didn't quite sit right, or and we can continue, if you have.
There's another question in the chat, Erica, from Trevor, and saying that he's curious about recommendations for diversifying the board. What are some suggestions for increasing the racial and ethnic diversity of the board? Should the board reflect the demographics of Vermont? Should there be certain demographic targets for different racial or ethnic groups?
Yeah, I mean, those are all good questions we should explore together. In Maine, they, it's a brand new fund that they're setting up, that they're very much, looking in many ways to even replicate Working Lands Enterprise Initiative in Vermont. So, but their initial statute for their board composition did have 2 seats for socially disadvantaged or underserved producers, and they have federally recognized tribal communities in Maine, unlike Vermont, but they do have a seat for somebody representing a federally recognized tribe. So, we don't have that right now in Vermont, right? So I think there's a lot of conversation we could have around, what does a diversified board look like? There's obviously racial and ethnic considerations, but there are other considerations as well, education level, income level, and so, there's that conversation, and then it's like, if the board felt like really wanting to diversify more, would that need to then be put in statute with a board seat? And so I think there's a lot of conversation we would need to have around that, and it likely would be a longer term recommendation.
I think Alex has his hand up, and then I have my hand up after Alex.
Go ahead, Alex.
Thanks. I don't have this very fully formed, but I'm just struggling with the idea of grant making is an incredibly exclusionary process on purpose, right? We have incredibly limited funds. We're getting 3 or 4 times the ask for every year, whenever we're trying to allocate those funds. And there are sort of 2 parallel processes. There's like this application process, and then there's sort of a review and award process. And so what is the problem that we're trying to solve in terms of, is it a soliciting grant applications question? Is it a how we award them question? And my little concrete brain is having trouble with, like, we're already getting dumped on with a bazillion applications, and like, what are we trying to sort of either fix in that process or improve in that process here?
Yeah. Well, I would definitely pose that question to the whole group. But I think from our understanding that even though, yes, it is limited funds with taxpayer money, with a high level of accountability and a very targeted focus. So there's sort of exclusionary aspects right there, right? You have to be a very viable business even to get the grant. That said, I think there are ways to make even the grant application process more accessible, because there may be a business that is would have barriers to even the grant, even accessing it and understanding it, that may be really impactful out in the world and in Vermont, like doing really good things, but they have certain barriers. So I think it's really exploring those barriers and aligning it to like what the outcomes that we want to see. And y'all did add priority strategy, priority 3, I think it was, around trying to reach more disadvantaged communities and businesses. So if that is, and you're starting to score that way too, so if you're trying to reach that and that's a goal, it's like making sure that the application is accessible and not to say that you're going to just start awarding to anyone that doesn't meet other types of criteria, obviously. And then of course on the scoring side too, I think that's another big one, right? I mean, that's where like the anti-bias stuff comes in, but also just really clear and transparent scoring, consistent scoring, and that as well. But I would love to hear others' thoughts on that.
I mean, I would just suggest that there's also there's a phenomenon where, just investing in diversity doesn't get you very far if it doesn't add up to stronger systems. And so there's kind of a balance here to be considered. There's some interesting case studies from the country of Kenya where investment at a local level that was not done with any view towards how do you actually create systems. And there's some interesting work going on right now in Mississippi where they're training farmers not just to be farmers, but to start other kinds of farm-related businesses. So you create these ecosystems that are about creating the flywheel for economic development locally. And I don't know the extent to which you all view applications through that lens, that you're not just investing in individual enterprises, but thinking about what are the larger economic implications. Michael Schumann has this whole idea of a pollinator enterprise that, is not just about the enterprise itself, but then how it feeds the surrounding ecosystem. So there's some good literature out there and case studies, but I don't know if that's the purview of this board. So it's about growing the pie. It's about growing the pie ultimately. You're not.
But yeah, I mean, Curtis, this board has historically, from the very beginning, taken a food systems and forest products industry level development orientation, in that we, with the different types of grants that we provide, the smaller business enterprise ones tend to be focused primarily on individual businesses and what their individual needs are, still thinking about where does it fit within the larger industries. But then the larger ones, it has always been about how does that particular business fit into the ecosystem of the food system or the forest products industry, and how might a strategic or catalytic investment in that particular entity have a ripple effect and be magnified in terms of its impact on other businesses that it supports. So that's definitely been a core part of how we've always looked at things.
And it is good. Yeah, and those types of questions are in the business enhancement application, even though, as Ellen said, the larger supply chain, like grant opportunities, have been more focused on that, systems impact.
I think where you start, if you're starting to bring the equity consideration into that systems work, then you're thinking about who's not being included, right? And so there's this whole idea in regenerative economics of economic necrosis. If certain parts of the economy are being cut off, whether it's a certain kind of producer, somebody with a certain background, a certain geography, it doesn't actually in the end create the full kind of abundance of flow you need. Anyway, interesting conversation.
Great.
Liz, and then I will go. I do have a question, but Liz, I see your hand up.
Thanks all. This has been really interesting. One of the things that I'm mulling on right now is the sort of simplification of the application. And I think like my starting point with this and with our programs is always like, we should definitely be trying to make it simpler every chance we get. And these are highly competitive and reviewers need to understand the project in order to be able to score them. And obviously, I don't think it's possible to really answer this question without going in detail and like looking at every single question and every part of the application. But do you have any thoughts from looking at the materials and working in other places around how to balance like giving reviewers adequate information that they can actually assess applications in comparison to each other and simplification?
I mean, that is the crux right there, Liz. I mean, simplifying versus, and too much leads to not being able to have adequate information to score. So clearly a conundrum there. Some ways to think about it would be like a micro grant type of application that was simpler, that was perhaps very focused in on a few specific criteria, around perhaps around barriers to capital access, or so it could be equity, it could be another another sort of criteria to keep it sort of contained, but also just a very simplified application process where you didn't have to have as many financial documents and things like that. I mean, that said, I think overall there are ways to further simplify the application process. I think a lot of it does have to do with the language. Again, people have referenced acronyms, but also, even some of the different languages around like outcomes and output, I think that there are some ways that we've been looking at, and that things could be further simplified where you'd still get enough information to score. So I think there's sort of that level of simplification and clarity. And then it's like, but if there's sort of documents that are absolutely essential to get, like a profit and loss statement or things like that, I mean, that may just be a non-starter, and it's like, no, we need that to make a good decision, and that's okay, right? It's not to say to get rid of it and make it so simple that you're really like don't have a lot to go on for a review. I do think it's a really big question though, so as we continue to look at applications and think through how to make them more accessible, and simplify, it would be good to think through some of those pieces, and also the surveys coming into and what people are finding really difficult about the application. So we'll be able to share that, which I think will be helpful.
Elizabeth, I know you're about to jump in. I do have to take off.
Go.
So I just wanted to quickly say,
Mm-hmm.
I really appreciate, one thought I had, Alex, to your question when I think about this, and I think this has come up a few times, is like, if this is already extremely exclusionary by nature, this process will allow us to be sure that we are not making those choices for reasons we don't want to be, unconsciously or through systems that aren't working, because we're already having to do that pretty massively and quickly. And that's where I think some of these, if we think, oh, well, there's already going to be so many, we'll always find some. And let's just be really optimistic that someday we're going to get so much money and we'll have all these systems in place. Just like Curtis said, the systems are going to be so helpful in getting us really intentional, and then we'll be able to share so much more. So that was just my thought with your question, because I understand it can seem like, yeah, we don't even have enough. And I'm sorry to run, everybody. Thanks, and I'll see you all next time.
Thanks so
Thanks,
much,
Susie. Yeah,
Thank
actually,
you.
that like really nicely sort of tied, is very tied into what I was going to say, which is, Alex, I really appreciate you asking that question, because I think, you know, I think this is tied to sort of a lack of definition, right? Or like common language. I think also like that I think it's a really important recommendation that's, been highlighted and been pretty clear for us from the beginning, like more shared understanding, shared language, shared understanding about what are we trying to solve here, right? Like I like the way that you frame that question, and I think it can be really even helpful to come up with a like clear list, because I think there are some more detailed things that we're trying to solve, like historical, like limit, lack of access to financing, like historically, like is that, and I think if we go through and can kind of discuss the many different things that we're trying to solve for, it actually could be a helpful exercise. I just sort of want to flag that. But then I think also just in regards to the tension between the amount of demand and like the limited funds, I think it's actually interesting. Like we can pull up the example that Donna gave today with 802 logging, right? Like, because I think this is a pretty common experience where, someone, and I would say that also, like I just visited Juniper Chase, same story. These businesses felt very daunted by the application process. They both sought out technical assistance in applying, right? And were successful. But I think not all businesses that might be successful, for example, like think to seek out technical assistance, or it's not like equitably available. Like these are the things that I think about quite a bit. And I think it's the same for the businesses that have had business owners that are not, that have been successful grant recipients, but are not like native English speakers, for example. They have also been successful largely through access to technical assistance. So for me, this is a big question of like, we're seeing quite a number of businesses be successful through accessing technical assistance. Like, what does that mean? I don't know if this is helpful at all, Alex, but like that's where my mind goes when we are asking about like what are we solving, what are the questions we're asking. And certainly the data from the community survey is going to be very interesting to see what applicants, non-applicants, successful, not successful, are identifying as like the greatest barriers. But yeah. And I guess the last thing I'll say is I keep feeling this need for more focus. Like when we talk about outreach, when we talk about, and I think it's related to Alex's question, like I'm relating this all back to like, with some more focus around like, specifically what are the challenges we're looking to solve. I think it will be easier to then implement things like thinking about board composition, like what are the seats we want to add, or outreach, like who, like what are the groups that we're like looking to spend more time, reaching out to, et cetera, et cetera. But without more focus, I think it can all feel a bit general.
Yeah, and you touched on this in your comment, Elizabeth, which was wonderful. Thank you. But a lot of it does stem to having a form of shared language around this and being able to start conversations from that shared point of understanding as to this is what we are considering equity, this is how we're going to define it, and then you can move into, okay, what do we do to make that happen. If equity is very defined very broadly. I mean, for example, we've shared this before, in the state of Maine, they do have rural folks from rural communities are included under their definition of equity, and Maine is 85-90% rural. So it is a very broad definition when they're going through. And so that's why they've been able to work from that definition to then add in some other layers, such as lack of historical access to capital being something that they want to refine that via a little bit further. So having some shared language, moving that into a formalized definition at some point would really help achieve some of that focus that you're recognizing is needed. All right, is there anything else before we kick it over to the next part of the event today?
And
Second session?
I did have a slide on next steps. We could do that after Curtis.
Okay.
That's fine too. It was literally just what's coming up in the next few months.
Let's do that right now really quickly. I'll let you take it, Erica.
Okay, I know my microphone was, sorry, I'm having a lot of technical difficulties today. So the two surveys are still open for service provider and association. It's one, and then for businesses, we're getting a decent response rate, but still looking for more. So hopefully we get more in, and then we'll be analyzing those. The one thing I'll point out about that is that for the businesses, at least a third of the businesses have never applied to WLEB. So it's great that we're actually getting some folks that haven't applied, which I think is really interesting to hear about what their barriers to even applying are. So that's been really interesting. We are going to be forming an equity-focused short-term advisory committee. We're going to be making some sort of more formal recommendations that we'll talk about in the January meeting, because we're going to analyze the surveys first and really come up with some short-term recommendations. So that January meeting, we'll be talking about that. And we'll be doing some interviews and a focus group, and then starting to implement some of the short-term recommendations. For example, kind of an evergreen training module, anti-bias training for reviewers as an example. And then we'll then kind of dive into the longer-term recommendations after that. So over to Curtis and Aisha, do you want to continue sharing? Do you want to share Curtis's deck?
Yes, let me get that pulled up.
All right, so as Aisha is doing that, just to let you know, we'll do this for about 50 minutes, and there will be 2 opportunities for you all to be in conversation in smaller groups. And the first part of this is interactive in the larger group. So there are a few tests we're going to be running here, lighthearted. Speaking of tests, I hope that a number of you, if not all of you, got a chance to take an implicit association test. And if you have not, look at that email that went out from Project Implicit, which is it's a product of researchers at 3 different universities, Harvard, Virginia, and Washington. And it's now 30 years old. They've been working on this for a while, trying to understand how people's implicit or unconscious biases are both, a way to help us navigate in this world, but can also become a trap sometimes when we're not aware of what is unconscious or implicit. So that was the whole point of that test. Do we have the slides up? It doesn't look like it just yet. Here we go. All right.
No.
So this is what we're hoping to get out of the time that remains that we have with you to develop some deeper insight into how unconscious bias operates in our lives, to develop a shared understanding of what unconscious bias is and how it can be addressed, and then also an understanding of how unconscious bias affects our work and implications for the future. We will get into talking a little bit about debiasing strategies, but we're going to spend the first part of this, if we go to the next slide, I'm going to truncate this a little bit, given we're a little later into this than we had expected. We're going to dive right into the overview of unconscious bias, give you all a chance to break out, we'll debrief, then talk about debiasing strategies, again, breakouts and debrief and talk about next steps. Next slide, please. So I already told you a little bit about Project Implicit. Again, go back to that email that came out from Elizabeth. If you have not had a chance, it's very eye-opening, and you can take any number of different implicit association tests, and we'll ask that this, your experience taking an IAT, if you were able to do it, just we'll ask you to reflect on what that was like during our first breakout shortly. All right, let's go to our next slide. So, what is unconscious bias? Well, this slide reads in a little bit of a funny way, but it's in some ways meant to stretch our brains because we're used to reading text in a certain way, which again is part of our processing system, which gets used to certain kinds of processes, and that helps create shortcuts and then creates challenges in other situations. But what this says is that unconscious bias are attitudes or stereotypes that affect our understanding, actions, and decisions in an unconscious manner. And so it represents often beliefs that seem so true, that they just become part of how we see things. It's like the water that we swim in, the air that we breathe. And as Anais Nin once said, we don't see things as they are, we see things as we are. So we start projecting onto the world what is actually going on internal to ourselves in terms of selective processing. So we'll say a little bit more about that going to the next slide. Because on a daily basis, can we go to the next slide? Is it not going?
Sorry, it is freezing on me a little bit.
Okay.
For some reason. Oh, there we go. This one?
Yes, exactly. So this really gets to the heart of the matter because we sometimes teach in our collaborative leadership courses this notion of the ladder of inference, which may be familiar to you all. It's a metaphor for how we create meaning and take action in the world. And so the idea is that we're on these ladders, and these ladders sit in this vast pool of data and information, and it's much more than we could ever actually process. And so our brains start to make shortcuts as we select certain data and then begin to associate the data that we select with past data that we've selected, and we start making meaning. And in that way, we start to make these kind of shortcuts that allow us to make sense of a situation and then take action. And it's kind of an amazing operating system, these shortcuts. So we don't just have to be blobs in this vast pool of data. The problem is, of course, that when we're not aware that what we see is not the entire truth, and when we're not aware that the meanings that we build are based on selections that we make, it's not the totality, then we can start making decisions and taking actions that may not be so helpful. So if we go to the next slide, this is where we get into, again, these implicit associations. So we're going to do a few tests to sort of demonstrate how this actually works in our brains. So this is based on a test called the Strube test, which is the same basic science as the implicit association test you took if you did take it, and it helps us to see the shortcut action and how we start to create these associations that can become very tightly linked. Again, helpful, efficient, except in situations where it isn't helpful. So if we go to the next slide, I'm going to ask you just in your brain as quickly as you can, say the color of the letters in each row. Go line by line and see if you can just say the color first. Just notice how easy or difficult that is. And then let's go to the next slide and do the same thing as quickly as you can. Say the color of the letters in each line. Did anybody notice any differences in speed or any difficulties between the previous slide and this one?
My brain was nosy and wanted to read the letters on the first slide instead of looking at the actual colors.
Yeah. And so what was the implication of that? What happened
It
as a
took a
result?
little longer.
Yeah, yeah.
I was
So the
quicker on
colors
the
of the
first one because I thought the second one was a trick question.
Yeah, interesting, right? Just watching our brains in action. So generally the colors of the letters are associated with the words in this particular slide. So it should be fairly simple to accomplish compared to the other ones where again, we're trying to do something that is not necessarily associated, right? Here, the letters correspond, or I should say the words correspond with the actual color. Let's go to the next slide. And again, say as quickly as you can and to yourself, the color of the letters in each row. All right, just noting how that was for you. And now let's go to the next slide and do the same thing. Say the color of the letters in each row as quickly as you can to yourself. Notice anything different between those two slides, anybody? Any differences and difficulties? Looks like someone's coming off mute.
Yeah, I was just gonna
The
say when the color matched the object, like the color matched the color of the object, it was actually easier for me just to want to say the color than to say the object than the color. I don't know, that was strange for me.
Yeah.
And it was
Yeah.
easier when there wasn't a connection for me to say the color and not the object, like in my mind. It's just interesting.
Any other observations?
I think the more that we do, the easier it's getting for my brain to shut off the actual what's being written and just concentrate on what I'm being asked to do as far as the color.
Interesting, right? So you're learning, actually you're watching your brain learn to do this. You may notice its first impulses because there are these implicit associations that can sometimes make it more difficult. Generally, when the colors of the word match the color of the thing that it actually references, it makes it easier. And that split second of additional thinking is an indication you have to bypass this implicit association, for example, between dirt and brown, blue and sky to get to the right answer. And we can learn. We can actually learn to maybe ignore something or understand that I'm making an association that's not helpful for me in my processing. So we're actually watching our brains in action. How about one more slide? Let's do the next one. Again, same challenge here. Colors. Say them to yourselves as you read down the list. Anybody say green for the first one when they read the word? I mean, the point
Yes,
being
much
here,
harder.
it was much harder. Yeah. David writes, I hesitate between number 3 and 4 2 times. Yes, it was slower on that one, says Erica. So again, the fact that the colors and words are mismatched causes you to have this literally a thing twice to get the right answer. So the point here being that in our society, there are many of these implicit associations that our brains make when they're on autopilot, and they do that a fair amount of the time, right? So we see something, something else fires, and then we keep going. It's efficient, it can be helpful, except when it is not. And there's also a related phenomenon, how we can sometimes fill in blanks when we don't have the full information. So go to the next slide, please. Oops, is that doing something funny? That is not, that's showing up weird. Okay. Well, I'm not sure if you can read that at all on your screens, but it should be a white text. It is on my version of it, and it's showing up darkened here, which adds an additional challenge. But if you lean in there you'll notice that if you try and read the sentence that might look like gobbledygook, you can actually start to read the words. I couldn't believe that I could actually understand what I was reading. The phenomenal power of the human mind, according to research at Cambridge University, doesn't matter in what order the letters in a word are. The only important thing is that the first and last letter be in the right place. So you can actually do this test where the letters in between may be out of order. First and last letters are there, and our brains immediately correct so that we can read the sentence. So this all really matters. I mean, again, we're looking at sort of the double edge here of our implicit, often unconscious processing and what it's able to do for us, but also what it might set us up to, do that is not so helpful. And so this is where we want to go into our breakout groups. So now you've had a chance to take an implicit association test, hopefully most, if not all of you, and to watch your implicit processing through these slides. And so we'll make, let's do this for about 8 minutes in our small groups. And it's just going to be a reflection on, if you took the implicit association test, what did you take from that? What are you taking from what we've discussed so far about unconscious bias and processing and its implications for your role as a board member? So 8 minutes in those breakouts, one for me, one for Aisha, one for Erica, which Claire is setting up.
Yep, one of the rooms is here in this main room, so I'm actually going to turn the recording off right now. And then Elizabeth, I think you can just pick a room. It doesn't let me send you somewhere. Okay.
Can we
The
pop
recording's still going.
Can we also pop the those questions in the chat, Curtis?
Yeah, I will put that in. Yeah.
Terrific. Thank you.
We'll have to do them when we get into the recording again.
Yeah.
There we go. All right, we're good. Recording has started. Thank you, Claire.
Okay.
Sorry.
So I'll repeat my question is, are there any burning questions or comments from that small group time? We're going to have a second round once we talk through some debiasing strategies, but anything in particular you feel like, oh, I want to say this in the large group right now?
I feel like what you shared in our group, Curtis, about like, it's not, biases exist, and sometimes it's just really helpful to name them and talk about it. And that can be a solution. It's not like putting up blinders and being like, I don't want to even say that I have this bias on this like specific application, but actually being willing to name it and talk about it with other reviewers. I think that feels to me like a pretty powerful practice.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think it's just the recognition is we're all biased. That's not bad or good. It just is. It's part of being human, right? It just is. And then being able to externalize when we're processing something, like the example was given, a poorly written application. Ooh, I'm struggling with this. I'm making all these assumptions that this person would not be able to run a business. Raise that. Have a meaningful conversation about it. If you keep it quiet, other people may have that assumption. Is that so? Talk it through. It could be pretty meaningful. Liz, please.
Yeah, I just think that that's so powerful, what you've just been talking about, Curtis, that like, I think I at least have been taught and was sort of socialized when I was young to think like any kind of bias was like not okay and that I should hide it. And if it showed itself, it was like a bad thing. And sort of like getting to a more nuanced point of view around that has been like, is a process, and it's really helpful for you to just really state that so explicitly. And I was working so hard to cheat the gender bias career one. I was like, I'm gonna nail this. I know exactly what's going on here. And I didn't. So that was illustrative.
Yeah. I mean, the decks are stacked against us, and at least my worldview is that it just is further proof of why we need each other. to complete each other, right? In a sense, to have a fuller picture. If we had the total view, I don't know. It's just it encourages to collaborate and especially to reach out to those who have very different perspectives, valid and also, you know, partial. So let's go ahead and dive back into the slides just for time's sake. And Aisha will be picking this up with slide 14.
1 second. I was trying to make sure that it was more visible this time around.
So the bridge we're building here is now between sort of our internalized processing and then what this means for us socially and culturally when some of these internalized processing things start to get projected outwardly. And so these unconscious biases, when they start to play out in terms of media and media consumption, can really inform how we see and think about the world. And so a lot, of course, has been written about Disney princesses and the messages that they send in terms of how they look, how they act, their bodies, how they're dressed, their racial identities, ethnic identities. And I talked to many, you know, women colleagues who say, geez, yeah, this really did a number on me for a number of different years in terms of telling me how I'm supposed to be or what it means to be a woman in the world. That does not mean everybody internalize that, but it can be, we know how powerful the media can be and how kind of amazingly early this begins to work its way into our systems. The lower right-hand image, if you know the 1968 blue eyes, brown eyes experiment done by Jane Elliott, where blue-eyed and brown-eyed dolls were given to kids of different races. And, you know, they've done it both in terms of skin tone, they've done it in terms of eye color, and that very early kids were already associating, you know, blue eyes being associated with some kind of virtuous, or white skin being virtuous and dark skin or brown eyes not being so. Like that really makes it in very early. These implicit associations that show up culturally and make it into our systems. If we go to the next slide, this even extends to things like height. So research over time that still continues to hold pretty true that there about fewer than 15% of American men are over 6 feet tall, yet almost 60% of corporate CEOs are over 6 feet tall. So there's something about height that plays itself into an association between, you know, how tall you are and what that makes in terms of you being a candidate for leadership. The implications of that, if we take it to another level, it's not just who occupies those seats, but it sort of means that there's an association between height and income. Does the next slide work? So broken down, $789 per year for an inch in height, right? So this can actually have economic implications. If we go to the next slide, anybody know who this is? William McKinley, last elected president whose height was below average. And he wrote that he was ridiculed in the press as a quote unquote little boy. So press immediately picked up on his height. If we go to the next slide, we know, of course, that female job applicants often have a more difficult time than male applicants. This image goes along with a story that female job applicants who negotiated were rated lower than male applicants exhibiting the same behaviors when negotiating for a job or negotiating for salary raises. Next slide. Is that freezing?
There we go.
Okay. There's also some interesting and maybe not surprising research that shows the likelihood of individuals using stereotypical stereotypical thinking in terms of associating people of a certain identity with certain attributes increases as their level of social power also increases. So the more formal power you have, the more you tend to stereotype, which can be a trap when we think about who then is often seen as being imbued with formal decision-making power. So if we go to the next slide, this lifts up the fact that implicit bias is part of this overall picture of what drives injustice. Again, when we take our internal processing, it gets externalized in certain kinds of cultural associations that privilege some over others. That interlocks with our explicit biases that can show up in terms of interpersonal isms, whether it has to do with gender or race. And that interlocks with structures and policies that keep all of that moving. And we've talked about this in the past in various forms. I'm not sure why implicit is being occluded there. That's strange. It's not on my screen. Anyway, let's move to the next slide because we want to get into the conversation about what we can actually do about all of this. We go to the next slide. There is a fairly simple formula. Again, the text on this is not showing up very well. It's
Let me
white
try
on
and
my
fix that
screen.
quickly.
Okay. Basically, there's a fairly simple formula that we can give everybody that breaks the habits of mind and action that flow from implicit bias. And it's really that awareness, knowing that implicit bias exists, is the first and most important step that came up in our small group. But awareness is not just enough. It has to be paired with concern about the effects. So as we think about the ripples or what this has to do with job opportunities, the way people are seen in society, you have to have awareness. You also have to have that concern. And then you have to bring actual strategies to de-bias, and that can help with breaking habits, not just short-term, but long-term. So this is what we're going to unpack a little bit further over a few slides that speak to de-biasing strategies. So if we could go to the next slide. So building awareness of our biases can help begin the process. We can't address something that we don't acknowledge or know about. So just education about implicit bias, what it is, how it operates, and how it affects not just individuals, but societies, groups, cultures, is a great starting point. And it's not enough. We go to the next slide. We know that another way of breaking implicit associations, and especially ones that are not socially helpful, is creating opportunities for social contact across difference. That reduces prejudice, it reduces implicit bias, particularly when those opportunities are in this context of mutual trust or peer-oriented power relationships. They offer opportunities to counter common stereotypes we might have of other people, of groups that appear anyway externally to be different than us. So social contact helps. Another strategy, next slide, is counter stereotypic training, teaching people to notice when stereotypes are actually operating and to consciously challenge those stereotypes. So associating certain people with a certain identity with certain professions or professional tracks and breaking that. You see more and more of that. I've been watching this over the last 10 years in ads. Who's the doctor? Who's the lawyer? Who's the nurse? You know, flipping some gender stereotypes, for example. So that counter-stereotypic training, which can be, in some sense, passive, just through imagery and media, can be very powerful. We go to the next slide. Another way of debiasing is actually to advocate for policies that can counter the effects of implicit bias. So this can include policies where you're reviewing applications where you take out the name so that we don't read the names John and Ibrahim and then have a very different opinion off the bat just because of the name that we've read, whether it has to do with race, ethnicity, or gender. So name blind application review would be an example. If we go to 28, the next slide, this is saying that basically policy is part of it, but also just sending these messages culturally that we are advocating for an inclusive society. supporting egalitarian motives, whether that be around gender, again, race, age, ability. A few more slides here and a few more debiasing strategies. Another key debiasing move is to establish relationships of accountability. So there are plenty of studies out there that show that people who know that they may have to explain their decisions exhibit fewer biases in their decision making. So if you have to explain why certain candidates were supported for a role or to receive a grant, that tends to engender more accountability than keeping that to yourselves. Next slide. There's good research that shows that the adage that shows up in many religious traditions, that we put ourselves in the shoes of the other, is a good way of helping us to get beyond our biases. For example, medical professionals who are invited to think about the situation of their patients exhibit less implicit bias. I'm working with some public defenders in New York City. They're starting to bring more social workers into their criminal practice so that they can understand the family context that surround many of the people that they see in sort of criminal court. That engenders more empathy and can counteract bias. One more strategy is just deliberate processing. So paying attention to your own thinking, having conscious efforts to examine our thinking and our biases. Again, not coming out of the gates bashing ourselves that bias, it makes us bad, but that is just a thing. It is a part of your human makeup, and trying to be more conscious with ourselves and one another about our processing. So the next slide sums this all up, and we'll make these available to you all. There's the list that we just walked through. Deliberative processing should be the same font size. I don't know what happened in the emailing to you, Aisha, these slides, but anyway, we'll make sure that's corrected for everybody to see. Are there any burning questions before we go back into some small groups to process this a little bit? Comments or questions? All right.
You can
Why don't we go?
shut off the recording too, please, Claire,
Okay.
and we'll go back into our groups if that's okay.
Yes, exactly.
Excellent.
And you'll see that in the chat, the question is already there before we go into how can we as a board implement debiasing strategies in our work together? Have there been any times when we've 5 minutes left? I will say that some good stuff came up in our small group about, potentially actionable ideas from diverse review committees to mapping where bias may show up in our process. And a last comment about making sure that the review process is done at a time when we might not be so prone to lapsing into stereotypes, like when we're exhausted and have low energy. Some of those things came up. Any other comments, questions from those groups? What was helpful? What's still eating at you, if anything? Aisha, Erica, anything from either of you?
I got something real
To
quick.
Allison's point that she was making at the very end, how collaborative our group has actually, our board has actually been and actually is when we, especially as we're narrowing things down. I feel we really work our way through the pathways, and come to a common path.
So being collaborative. Yeah, there was a comment made in our room that the diversity of the group can be really helpful. We know some things about some things, but not about others. And so leaning into that recognition can be super helpful. Others? Must be lunchtime. Well, so, what I'm taking is that there's a lot of thoughtfulness. It showed up in the small group. I think a few people found it very helpful to consider that being biased does not make us a bad person. That is just a human reality. It speaks to our, unavoidable incompleteness as people. And David's comment about when you lean into collaboration, you get the job done is part of the evidence of that. We really do need each other to make smarter decisions when we wrestle with some of this complexity. You will receive these slides. We're going to continue to consider what might make an evergreen kind of training for you all. I'm not sure the process yet of that, Aisha and Erica and Elizabeth and Trevor and Claire, but we can take some of this material if you found it helpful and move it into that, and certainly invite training experiences that you've had around this in other places. Please bring any of that that's been helpful to this team so we can create something that would be powerful and relevant. I am going to hand it back to Elizabeth.
Yeah, great. I think we already went over, Erica, I think you reviewed the slide around next steps. Our next board meeting is going to be a decisions meeting for the Service Provider and Producer Association pool. Thank you to all of you who are reviewing applications. So we're not going to be doing any work around this initiative in December, but we will be back in January with results from our community surveys and further reflections around short-term recommendations. But yeah, first decision meeting coming up in December, so stay tuned for that. And everyone who is reviewing should have also received a meeting invitation for the review conversation yesterday. So let me know if you are reviewing and you did not receive an invitation. Other than that, I think, Allison, we're
Excellent.
complete.
Thank you all. We'll see you back on December 16th and our friends from InCommon in January. So the work will continue. And let's see, just thank you all for your participation today. And I know the online virtual can be difficult at times. So apologies for the conversations being cut when you're getting kicked out of your virtual room, but excited that at least we're having that conversation. So again, as David said, I made a comment in our room of how collaborative this group is. I think I've served here for 8 years. I've got nothing compared to the years that Ellen Kaler has and Liz and I don't know, a few others. So it's a good group. Appreciate working with you all. And we'll see you on the 16th. For now, we'll take a motion to adjourn on time.
So
Don't be
moved.
shy.
I'll make that motion.
Thank you. Who was the so move?
Elizabeth.
Excellent. All right. So we have Elizabeth and David. All those in favor say aye.
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 Thank you. Those opposed, nay. Motion carries. You shall be dismissed. Thank you very much. Have a good day, all.
Thank
Thanks,
you
Allison.
all.
Allison.
Happy Thanksgiving.